Hello, HyperFast Agent Nation. On this episode of the podcast, I am interviewing a power duo. They are best friends turned business partners. One of the top 5% of real estate agents in the ultra competitive San Francisco Bay Area. They also coach real estate agents on how to find their story, how to brand themselves. Welcome to the show, Kenny and Connie. All right, welcome to the show, Kenny and Connie. I'm excited to have this power team on the HyperFast Agent show today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for
Thanks for
having
having
us.
us.
Yeah, and you guys, just so the listeners know, you're coming to us from the Bay Area today, correct?
Yep. San Francisco Bay Area.
All right. Well, always great to have West Coasters on, and we've got a lot of great stuff that you guys are doing. Some of it you've been doing for a while now. Some of it is really new and really relevant to what's going on in the country right now. So it's going to be exciting to talk about. Before we get into that kind of stuff, why don't you give our listeners or our viewers out there that are watching a quick intro about yourself and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. So we are Connie Chung and Kenny Gong, and we started our residential sales business primarily in San Francisco. And together we've sold over 100 million in volume. And we decided to turn our focus to coaching and training our fellow real estate professionals just recently. And we coach now on personal branding, authentic storytelling, and how to build relationships, how to cultivate better relationships. And it's been really exciting. We love this profession. I personally come from a real estate family. My dad's been a realtor in San Francisco for almost 50 years. So I grew up in the business in many ways. And I've seen how this profession has the opportunity to change people's lives in a really dramatic way, in a really powerful way. It did so for my family, and I've seen how many people my dad helped when he was in his early days in the industry. And so it just feels really nice to be part of that lineage. And we're now really excited to share a lot more about what we do with you all today.
Thank you. And how is it growing up with a father, real estate family? Like, did you always know you were going to get into this, or did you try something else first and then come back to it? Or?
Yeah. Well, so my dad is an agent as well as a developer. So I grew up not understanding what was going on, but just being on a lot of construction sites. And so I was just always running around construction sites, and primarily all in residential. And just kind of seeing that this was a thing that people did. And I never thought that it would be for me at all. But what I did know growing up was that my dad was always there. My dad was always there for me. And he was there to drive me to wherever I needed to be. And it just felt like he was a very present father. And my mother was also a very present parent as well. And so I knew instinctively that real estate created this lifestyle for my family, that we were able to be really present with each other. I never thought it would be for me. I went the social justice route. So I studied ethnic studies at UC Berkeley. I worked as a nonprofit fundraiser at an LGBTQ youth nonprofit in San Francisco. That's actually how Connie and I first met, as grassroots fundraisers. Connie was a fundraiser at an Asian women's shelter, which is a domestic violence shelter. And so that was our life, sort of in social justice. And then there was just a moment when Connie first ventured out. She was the first one, and said, I think I want something different. And she chose real estate. And then soon after, I chose real estate. And yeah, that's how it wasn't my father that got me into real estate. It was actually Connie.
Okay. And what drove you or attracted you to get into real estate, Connie?
It was a lot of failures that led to getting into real estate in some ways. I similarly had, like Kenny, had seen sort of how real estate had really empowered my family growing up, even though it was not a field I thought I would ever see myself in. But seeing how my parents as immigrants built some wealth in investing in real estate, when it came down to it and wanting a change in my profession, I applied for a ton of jobs, and being in the nonprofit industry where you're wearing so many hats for very little money, I remember, and being in San Francisco, so many of my friends talking about free food and free lunch at their tech startups. And I thought, okay, sign me up. But I applied to so many of them and didn't get hired in any position. I would make it very far, but ultimately wouldn't get the job. And so real estate had always been in the back of my mind. And I thought, let's just give this a try. And I had coffee with a neighbor of mine who is a top agent, and just to pick her brain and see what the industry was all about. And she offered to mentor me. And I thought, nothing else is panning out. This seems like a great opportunity to learn in the field. And so I took it head on. And I remember being really scared because there's no set sort of hours or set income. But I remember just a month in, I was so excited because I had simultaneously been working part-time at my nonprofit still for that safety net. But I remember thinking like, wow, I can't wait to finish up my job so I could work in real estate full time, because it was just such a dynamic profession and you still wear so many hats. And I learned that I actually got to transfer a lot of the skills from my previous jobs into being a realtor, and that really worked to serve us well.
How was the transition for you? Were you scared, or did it happen quickly? Like walk us back kind of that first 6 months or a year or so.
Definitely was scared, and I knew I was taking a risk at first, but once I was in it, there's so much talk of like, oh, you can be a realtor part-time, but no, it's a full-time job. And I remember as I was starting off that, wow, this is so fun, and there's so much to do. You can constantly be working, and I picked up some momentum early on, and even I had heard horror stories. Some people don't make a deal until 6 months in the industry. Luckily, I did within my first month. So I loved it because it's very people-based. It's a lot of interpersonal relationships, and that's something I really thrive on, and just got to use my skill of being empathetic to really benefit and help people. And ultimately, that's what makes this industry so fun and challenging at the same time, because you hold a lot of people's hopes and dreams, but also their biggest fears and anxieties. And the troubling part is when there are things that are out of your control and that create a lot of stress, but really figuring out how to work through that. And sort of those kinds of things have really transferred into our practice as coaches and trainers, into like, okay, how can we build these stronger mindsets? How can we work through things we don't have control over? How can we manage our inner critic when we don't get a client who signs with us, or how to navigate all of that, as well as the tactical business day-to-day aspect.
I agree. It's a very, very, very tough balance, I think, between the kind of logical numbers, economic side of it versus the emotional and sometimes the harder to measure kind of side. So there's a lot going on,
Really?
And you're dealing with people, and certainly being able to empathize with them and see where they're coming from, even if it logically is maybe not quite there. Like if they're feeling it, it's real to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to you have to have that skill as a real estate agent. And
Absolutely.
you know, you certainly, from what I can tell, seem to have it down. And I know now you're very big into training and teaching other real estate agents
Mm-hmm.
how to tell their story, how to brand themselves. Was that a big part for both of you in growing your business? Like, you know, talking about your story, your background, and who you are. Did that play a big role in, you know, the growth of your business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting because it's one of those things that for us, we always talked about our story, but not in a way that felt really deliberate or intentional. And I think just naturally, both Connie and I are storytellers, and within that empathy, we sort of naturally connect with people by telling stories. And it wasn't until we started coaching that we realized, oh, this is something that not every agent does, and not every agent can do, or has the skills to be able to do. And so we thought that this was such an opportunity because it's such a powerful way to create connection with clients, and especially if we're doing talks in front of large groups of people, and we want to help people build that trust with us, but also to share that trust that they're building with their clients is also rooted in their connection with clients. That's storytelling. That's talking about how are you really connecting with people, by just showing a little bit about yourself and being vulnerable and being really present and authentic in that kind of way. And so we've naturally just did it. And I think because, especially for me, because I have this lineage with my family, it just made sense that this is how I would talk about how I got into real estate. This is because I can talk about how my dad was able to help many Asian American families, Chinese immigrant families, break through the cycle of poverty, break through all of these things that they were going through, all of these struggles in the 70s when housing discrimination was a very real thing, and there were policies set in place that made it legal for landlords and sellers to discriminate. I have that as my lineage. That's my story. That's my history. And so to be able to be rooted in that, and then talk about how now I can empower my clients to be able to also step on that first rung of their own personal wealth, build their first rung of generational wealth. And there's that through line, that was very natural. And so, but we also know that that's just my story, and everyone's got their own story. Connie's got her own story. Dan, you've got your own story about how you not only arrived in this real estate world and sort of like the tactical stuff, but also like what's the meat? What's the actual juicy stuff that actually got you here? And so much of it is around that mindset, right? Like it's so much around like, how did you get over those struggles? How did you overcome those failures to actually kind of become a stronger, more resilient person to do what you needed to do to get to where you are?
Yeah, I mean, my story's got some similarity with Connie in that I thought I would go get a job at a big strategy consulting firm, and
Yeah.
kept getting far in the interview rounds, but then told no. And you know, eventually I figured, well, I'll try real estate, and it worked, and it worked really fast. But
So for the better.
yeah, well, it wasn't until I banged my head against the wall for quite some time through that process.
Yeah. And this is what we see across the board. It's like you bang your head against the wall. You're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I guess I'll do real estate. You get in real estate, then you're like, oh, how do I do this? How do I do this thing? And then you have to get scrappy, right? And like all those amazing stories of you getting scrappy, those are like, that's what I want to hear. That's what people connect to at the end of the day.
And do you, like, how do you teach real estate agents to get their story out? Is it like what's the strategy and the tactics behind, teaching real estate agents to do this?
Yeah. It's what we first talk about is just sort of the power of story. We talk about that. We talk about how people can how they connect with people, and oftentimes it's through story and hearing other people's stories, so that you can kind of say, oh yeah, I get who they are now. And then from that understanding of the power of storytelling, then we dig into, okay, let's talk about for our realtor clients, like, what is your story? And the way that we primarily talk about it is through character, and what makes someone's character. And when we talk about character, like, we ask people, like, okay, if you're going to talk about your character, like, how would you describe your character? And the number of realtor bios that say, like, I've got high integrity, I work hard, I'm professional, like, all of these buzzwords, like, are wonderful, but they don't mean anything until you actually dig into, okay, what are the stories that illuminate what integrity is for you? And so when we talk about character, there's a few things that we sort of mention. We talk about stories of origin. We talk about stories of motivation. We talk about stories of struggle. We talk about stories of people. And we talk about stories of passions. So it's sort of like, how do you dig into someone's origins, their struggles, their motivations, that are sort of enlivening and emboldening how they go about their day, and we start from there. And then we translate that into how do we sort of like take that and turn that into your brand, and how do we translate your authentic life that you're living into an authentic brand, because those aren't necessarily like easy translations for a lot of folks. And so it's thinking about, how do we just help people think through the tactics of like branding, right? But do it in a way that they're infusing their character through these stories that we're pulling out with people.
And what do you think prevents like the average real estate agent from doing this? Because I've seen it. I've heard from other trainers and coaches and speakers as well, and a lot of real estate agents, they kind of look like everyone else when in their profile, their bio, their marketing, etc. So like, what do you think is preventing agents from doing this more, or focusing on this more?
Yeah.
I think our industry puts a lot of emphasis and stress on numbers and production, selling X amount or taking on X amount of listings. And I think it in focusing on the quantitative, the data, the stats, we sometimes as an industry forget the more qualitative aspects of our industry. And the funny thing is, our clients, they don't stay awake at night thinking about numbers and statistics. They stay up at night thinking about their hopes and dreams, their fears and anxieties. And when we can remember that, it helps us to realize, how can we connect with them on that level? Sure, we may be top agents, and so many of agents, have really great numbers and have stellar production volume, or some may not, and they're kind of wondering, well, how do I stand a chance? And it's really in figuring out, where's that trust factor, so that I can get folks to really, one, like me, but also want to work with me. And in remembering the importance of just building trust, that kind of basic human instinct and need, it helps agents to want to put time and realize the need to put time into thinking through what builds trust. And that's showing our character, talking about our values, our challenges, our origins, our people who motivate us, and our passions, because that's what helps to connect with other people and ultimately get them to like and want to work with you.
And I think also, one of the big things that prevents people from getting to this point is that they rely on pretty. If you look at even some of the pretty good brands that realtors have, they're just like pretty, right? Like, they've got the pretty listings, they've got the pretty lifestyle photos, they're really polished, and they just look like they look kind of like a magazine, which is wonderful. But I think what people then rely on is that they rely on pretty, and they think that pretty is going to be enough for them to build their brand. And for us, it's not about pretty. It's moving from pretty to personal, and understanding that yes, pretty is wonderful, but pretty is also like doesn't mean anything, because it's also our industry is getting prettier and prettier. It's like so easy to have a great looking brand these days. It's so easy to you've got like Canva, like our company, our brokerage Compass makes it so easy to get beautiful lifestyle photos. So it's like, we have all of this access to pretty things. But yeah, to your point, whenever you just focus on the pretty, then it just begins to look like everyone else. So then for us, it's like, okay, if you really want to differentiate yourself, because at the end of the day, this is about differentiation, right? And you can't rely on pretty to differentiate yourself. And so it's like, what can you rely on? And one of the interesting things that we've also seen is that people tend to rely on competence. They rely on like, okay, what's your personal brand? And they'll say, my personal brand is excellent service, right? And which is great and necessary. But when you're in hot markets like we are in the Bay Area, like everyone has excellent service. Excellent service is just like the price of admission when it comes to any of these things. So it's like, if you can't rely on pretty, and you can't even rely on like competence and excellent service to differentiate yourself, what can you rely on? Then it goes into, okay, let's talk about character, because everyone's got a unique character and everyone's got a unique story that they can use to tell their brand or to communicate their brand.
And what do you think that process is for realtors, particularly ones that are maybe starting out? Or I know for you guys focus on helping people from backgrounds where they may not have the same opportunities as everyone else. Like how do those people in those positions find a brand or find their brand, I should say, in a way that'll like actually work and get them business and help them long term?
One thing, when I first got in the industry, I always thought I had to be the very traditional, typical realtor that was very salesy, and much older, because I was young getting into the industry. And I remember always feeling like, oh, this is like, feels so uncomfortable. And then I remember thinking, my mentor shared, there are so many ways to be successful in our industry. Realtors can run their business a million different ways, and each one be successful in their own way. And that's when I came to learn, like, I think I can be myself. And when you just own it and kind of remember and know and feel confident in where you're coming from, the skills you bring to the table, that's sort of the grounding seeds and planting seeds of just knowing who you are and really being able to share that with others, and realizing that that's actually what helps you connect to other people and to your clientele, and to really build the right kind of clientele, people who understand where you're coming from or feel like they are being understood and can trust and want to work with you.
And I think specifically when we're talking about, like you had mentioned, we do work with a lot of realtors of color. One of the things that we're excited to do is we just launched a Race and Real Estate Roundtable, which is a live series that brings realtors of color to talk in conversation with each other about race in our real estate profession. And a part of what is important is to remember that for realtors of color, like, our story is so important to share in the specific ways that we've experienced it. And to really, Connie was just talking about like being yourself. And for us, it's also about how do you tell your story specifically as a person of color and as a realtor of color in a way that feels full, and a way that does not ignore that you're a person of color, that does not ignore that race may have may have impacted the way that you came of age. Because I think a lot of realtors, like, whenever you become a realtor, you've already got a whole life that you've already lived to get to that point. So it's like, how do we encourage people to then share their story about those origins, right? Like, we're talking about origins. So what that means is like family origins. For a lot of people, for a lot of realtors of color, they're coming from, for me, my family is an immigrant family. And that is very, very sort of crucial to how I came of age. So it's talking about that, talking about what the struggles that my family, what we all went through in order to find our way in America. And making sure that when we talk about these stories, it's real and it's honest and it's authentic, and acknowledging that, like, me sharing a Chinese immigrant story does not only mean that like Chinese people are going to resonate with that story, but it's just saying, like, I'm going to talk about the specific story of my Chinese immigrant family, and what that's going to show is grit and resilience and integrity and incredible hard work and an incredible work ethic. And those are the things that not only am I illustrating by talking about my specific story, so it feels differentiated to me, but those are the specific qualities, the character traits that are going to attract my clientele to me, and attract the right people to me who are going to resonate with that and with those qualities.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Even though some people may look at it and think like, oh, this will only connect with someone of a similar background. Well, that's not really true. I believe, like you pointed out, like there are some great universal principles and truths that many people will be drawn to, and the story really is just the vehicle that communicates those universal principles that you embody. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely. And because that story is going to be different for everyone, that's how you get the differentiation in your branding. And that's how you get a brand that feels different than everyone else's. Even though, yes, you're talking about sort of similar things, but when you say integrity, hard work, and you're not showing what that looks like, then it doesn't mean anything. But if you're talking about your story, even if Dan, if in your brand, you're talking about hard work. In my brand, I'm talking about hard work. We're talking about hard work. But because your story is going to be very different than mine, it's actually going to feel different, and it's going to feel differentiated. And so that's what's exciting about the work that we do, is because when we can help our realtor clients like do this story work, then their brand, their personal brand, naturally becomes differentiated from everyone else.
Yeah, I think you've kind of got a unique vantage point in looking at some of the issues we're facing as a country and as realtors today, and that you have the immigrant background. Your family grew up during a time when discrimination was actually allowed in housing by the law, as you mentioned, and fast forward 30-40 years to today. Things have gotten better for sure, but there's still a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and you're hearing a lot of those voices through this roundtable that you're facilitating, right?
Yes.
So, like, what do you think as real estate agents right now? Some of the issues for realtors of color and other backgrounds, like what are the common issues you're seeing, and what are the things that you think need to be changed or improved or different?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a huge question. And first and foremost, I think that this is, it's important to differentiate that how I differentiate it. And whenever we talk about these kinds of conversations, it's important to talk from like sort of a personal perspective. So for me, this is the national conversation that we're in right now around police brutality is specifically about talking about Black lives. And I think that's really, really important to remember, because whenever we talk about race, we do oftentimes talk about sort of like realtors of color, like as a broad as a broad rainbow of people. But I think right now it's really important to remember that like that we want to have conversations. I want to have conversations specifically with white realtors and non-Black realtors of color, because I think our experience is going to be very, very different than a Black realtor's experience. And so when we talk about being a white realtor or being a non-Black realtor of color in this particular time, it's about recognizing that we all come with our privileges to the table, and that our story is very much in a way being made right now around what does it mean to be an ally to the Black realtors in our community. And I think that's what's, we talk a lot about stories and character, and that, all of these stories are then stitched to create the tapestry of our lives and to create the tapestry of like our character. And so when it's really this conversation that we're in, it's sort of like, it's a story in the making, and it's a story about how we as white realtors and non-Black realtors of color, how are we showing up? How are we showing up to this conversation about race in a way that is just thoughtful? And at the end of the day, like, it's about thoughtfulness. And for us, we do branding and we do authentic storytelling all around sort of the notion of thoughtfulness. And our podcast is called the Thoughtful Realtor Podcast. And it's about how are we showing up in a way that feels holistic, in a way that feels real, and in a way that feels honest, and in a way that brings our whole sort of selves and our whole experience to our profession, right? And so like, if that's sort of the context of what it means to be a thoughtful realtor, then this conversation that we're having right now as a nation has to also be brought in. And so because I'm not a Black realtor, I have to think about, okay, what does this mean to be an Asian realtor in this time? And what it looks like is learning, and it looks like having conversations like this, specifically within the context of our profession, right? Because it's a little bit uncomfortable and it's a little bit awkward, but that's, I think, part of it. And part of sort of like this thoughtfulness is kind of getting uncomfortable. So much of what we do when we're pulling out stories with our clients, it's gonna get comfortable because people have pain, people have hurt, people have trauma when they're talking about their story. And we're not therapists, we're not like life coaches, we're not counselors, but these things come up. And so we talk about like, okay, these are real things. So whatever we're feeling, whatever we're experiencing, let's bring it in and have a conversation about it so that it informs what authenticity looks like in our branding. And I think that's the connection right now. And it's an exciting conversation, but potentially an uncomfortable one.
Yeah, I agree with you that like that these types of conversations I think are, like people want to learn, especially realtors like myself or others that don't have the experience of coming from the perspective of a Black realtor. Right. It may be uncomfortable, but
Yeah.
ultimately, like, you have to have the conversations if you want to gain that other person's perspective. So I think it's an interesting time for you to be launching this roundtable, right? You said you just launched it.
We just launched it. Yep.
Kenny came up with the idea maybe 2 weeks ago. And I remember thinking like, whoa, Kenny, talking about race and racism is so deeply personal for me that sure, I'd love to talk about it, but I'm also scared and uncomfortable, and to take on this roundtable in a leadership position, that's a lot of weight. But in this role as coaches and educators, so much of it is diving in deep into the uncomfortable and bringing people in that journey with us. And we had our first roundtable last week. where we brought in two. It's a very kind of conversational, but we also have two guests to do a lot of the talking and sharing of their insights, as well as bringing in the audience. And it was so powerful. We didn't know what to expect, but that it would hopefully bring some movement, and it certainly did. And we're really excited to see where it goes and the types of conversations we'll continue to have. And yeah, it's certainly no time like today to be having these conversations in our community where there's so much still to learn.
And it's interesting because originally the reason why this all started was because I ran into a stat that only 15% of our realtor community, according to NAR, is represented by people of color. It's 15%.
That's like all non-white races basically, or?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's a pretty jarring number. And when you think about the number of people of color in the US general population, the numbers are hard to kind of like always really identify, but it's anywhere from 25 to over 40% of our country, of our general population is represented by people of color. So the disparity is pretty big. And that was sort of what started that spurred the initial roundtable. And just thinking about how do we diversify our profession in a way that like helps people feel like that this can be a profession for them, that people of color feel that can be a profession for them, and how do we set them up for success? And this is also the reason why it's also so important, is because like we know what realtors represent in our communities. In like every single community across the United States, realtors have such a unique position as community leaders. And we help people with like the most pivotal, stressful transactions of their lives. And oftentimes we're holding their hopes and their aspirations. And they're coming to us with like all of the cash that they've saved for like years and years and years. And they're saying, help me spend this cash. And so that responsibility is so huge. And because of that, realtors sort of operate in this notion of like community stewardship, right? And realtors have the responsibility of a community's care and compassion. And so it's so important, especially when communities are feeling like fractured or like overwhelmed or hurt, that realtors kind of step up and take a place as they're naturally leaders, they're naturally community leaders.
So why do you think, because I had no idea of that number before you threw it out there, why do you think minority groups are underrepresented in the overall realtor picture by maybe it looks like at least half or more they're underrepresented by? Why do you think that is, and how do you think we change that?
I think it's very complex, and there's certainly many layers to that part of it, institutional part of it, personal. I think in growing up, especially in the immigrant communities, you don't hear about real estate as a profession as much. And you don't see many realtors who look like you in the field either. So a huge part for us is really believing that representation matters. And when we can see people who look like us, who identify as us in roles like a realtor, or even in management for sales managers, or even for real estate coaches and trainers, when you see more people who look like you, it makes you believe that it's much more feasible. But when you don't, it seems like a whole other world away. So one thing we really encourage in our Race and Real Estate Roundtable is, how can we build up this pipeline? And what does that look like in terms of representation, recruitment, mentorship, and really just showing up so that our future generations can see that this is a viable profession and a really powerful and thriving one too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of have to, I mean, we were sort of talking about it earlier today. You kind of have to like stumble into this profession, and I think just, you know, there's so many different factors. A lot of times when it comes down to, um, you know, there's tie-ins to race, there's tie-ins to socioeconomic statuses that that create conditions where certain communities are stumbling onto real estate as a viable profession more likely than other communities. And that's certainly true. You know, that's certainly true. We've seen that across the board, just across the board, across the nation, that if you don't see potential, if you don't see possibility, then oftentimes people just don't see it as anywhere near a viable possible for them, feasible for them.
Yeah, I would agree with you know, both of you on that. You know, somehow I think these minority groups need to be made, you know, more aware of the opportunity. But a lot of people in general don't know about the opportunity in real estate. I certainly didn't. Sounds like Connie stumbled upon it sort of like I did, and it's not an industry or profession that has a very high barrier to entry in terms of like needing to have a lot of money or a lot of
Yeah.
education or a lot of connections. Like those things can potentially help, but definitely not required. Like
Yep.
you don't have to spend six figures on an education for it. You don't have to put, you know, tons of money or be able to get a big loan to buy equipment or other expenses to start, right? And you don't even really need to have a big network. I certainly didn't in the area that
Mhm.
I started in, and so I do think it's you know, all of those things probably make this a great industry for uh, people that don't have great economic backgrounds to get into, and it seems like it's an awareness thing, perhaps.
I think it's part of it. And I mean, I just like, I love this industry. I just love this profession because exactly what you're talking about, right? Like it's a profession that has a low entry to bear, a lower barrier to entry. And you know, I think that there's, in terms of success, I think there's a lot of different things that go into success. Partially it's luck. It's partially it's a lot of the privilege. It's the privileges that we come to the table with. Absolutely, all of those things are important to acknowledge. And a big part of it is scrappiness and like, you know, getting gritty and figuring it out and just being like, okay, I don't know anything. I don't know what I don't know, and I'm just going to figure it out and I'm just going to go for it. And also being able to think about like, okay, then it's like, once I've sort of had a couple of steps, like where else can I go? Do I want to build a team? Do I want to become a HyperFast agent? Do I want to, like, you know, do a ton of business that's on the, you know, sort of like on the lower volume, or do I want to do like luxury? Is that, and if I want to do luxury, like these are the steps that I have to take. And so I think in that way, it's also this amazing sort of like fluid industry where you're constantly pivoting and constantly figuring out like, where do I want to go next? What's the next challenge? What's the next puzzle to put together? And I think that also creates this sort of like creativity, right? That just makes this profession so malleable. And I think this is why I feel so passionate about like more people of color coming into this industry, because it is malleable and you can make it whatever you want it to be. And there's so much flexibility, so much opportunity, that I'm like, yes, this is why I love it, right? And this is why I know that other people will love it too.
Yeah, there's certainly a ton of you know, unlimited paths to how you can succeed in real estate, and it's cool to see both of you, you know, each coming from your own story, like you said, and now sharing with others how to do that, and creating a platform where, you know, other people, and people of
Yeah.
color can get together to discuss their stories and the challenges they see. So thank you for that. We've got to wrap up now, but we always end with our HyperFast round. So I've only done this one other time with two people. Because normally, it's just one. So you guys are the second duo to go through the HyperFast round. So you ready?
Great.
Let's do it.
She'll go first, and then I'll follow up after.
All right. What's the biggest challenge you two face working together?
Well, Kenny and I were friends before we became business partners. And sometimes when we get together, now that we're in COVID and sheltering in our own respective homes, it's different. But sometimes when we would get together, it would be so much fun where we would want to talk about personal things. And so it would be like, okay, let's reel it in and get back to business. So I would say staying focused on the task at hand instead of what we're going to have for lunch.
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge is thinking about what's the biggest impact that we want to make and how do we make that impact. And there's so many different ways to do it. And it's like, where are we best going to serve people and serve our clients?
Okay. What's your biggest piece of advice to real estate agents right now, in the time period we're facing with the issues we're facing?
I would say to own your failures and see them as testaments to your strength and your perseverance and your resilience, and that it's okay to talk about them.
Yeah. And I think similarly, it's like, don't worry about getting messy. This is a time to get messy because it's going to be really hard and it's uncomfortable, and being uncomfortable, being a little bit awkward is the only way to actually like figure out, okay, what do I want to say, right? Like, what do I actually think? And the only way to really figure that out is to just talk about it and to articulate it. And sometimes that means just making mistakes and messing up. So
what's your favorite or most used social media platform?
Our most used is certainly Instagram. Whether it's my favorite or not now, I don't know, because sometimes I feel like I spend way too much time and I wonder how productive that time is, but it's certainly our most used, and there's always something new to try within it.
My favorite is TikTok. I'm just going to throw it out there. I love it. It's ridiculous. It's amazing. It's educational. It's insightful. It's silly. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of business opportunity there too.
I do too, actually. And I'm starting to meet more realtors using it, and I've been using it a lot, probably the last 4 or 5 months. But I think the platform has certainly aged up a little bit compared to like a year ago. So I know like a year or so ago, people were like really knocking it for just teenagers on there, but it's probably like Instagram 5 or 6 years ago, and it is a very powerful video editor and app, of course. But I think another thing that's cool about it is it's not as pretty and polished as some of the other platforms, and I think people crave that because we don't potentially get enough of that authenticity in society right now.
Oh, we'll have to find you on there, Dan.
Yeah, it's just my name, Dan
Right.
Lesniak. So I'm definitely on there, and I usually make 1 or 2 every day. So
That's good. It's just so good. They're so fun. Do you dance on there, Dan?
I've maybe done that like 2 or 3 total. I don't know.
Okay.
Not much, but a little bit. So but I have though on a couple of them. Man, I forgot what my next question was going to be.
I know, it's too much enthusiasm about TikTok.
Now, what's the biggest business challenge or even mistake that you've made, and what did you learn from it, or how did you overcome it?
Ooh, I have adopted the fake it till you make it mentality ever since I can remember. And in real estate, sometimes you just got to fake it till you make it. But one time I remember a client, I think it was my second client ever, had asked me a question about financing and on the loan side. And I just spewed out an answer that I did not know the answer to, and then realized, okay, Connie, that's probably not the best way to go. And so I had to quickly reel it in and then divert to the professional. I don't think it's the biggest mistake I've ever made, but certainly one that happened early on that was a big reminder to be okay to say if I don't know the answer and point to the direction in which there may be the right answer found.
My biggest challenge or biggest mistake, and I don't see it necessarily as a mistake, but it's something that I think about, is I just wish I got into real estate earlier.
Yeah.
I don't know. It sounds like you can relate, Dan. I'm sure there are others that are listening that can also relate. I'm like, and I got in pretty early. Like, I think I don't know what I was, like 26. So I got in relatively early, but I was like, if I just graduated college and just like immediately got in real estate, boom. Wish I'd done that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that are successful in anything like have that same answer. And I think what you can learn from it, or what people out there listening can potentially learn from it, is if you're not happy with something in your life, or think there's a better path for you, like the time to start is now, like
right now,
or don't wait a year or two, do it now.
Yeah.
Last one now. Where do you see yourself in 5 years from now?
Yeah.
Wow. Professionally, Kenny and I, because we've switched our career and run a team that runs our in the field client service, and now we're doing a lot of coaching, teaching, and training. I'm really hoping that in 5 years, a lot of our work will be done online. And personally, gosh, hopefully, especially with COVID being over, hopefully traveling the world while running our online real estate business at the same time.
And for me, I would love to have a coaching space that is specifically for realtors of color, where they can feel that they get support, where they get training, where they get mentorship, where they get accountability when it comes to building their business and building a personal brand that really speaks to who they are. I would love to see that, and I'm hoping that these conversations that we're starting will start to sort of plant the seeds for all of those. Because I would just love to see more folks of color in this industry thriving, succeeding, more top agents that are realtors of color, and I would love to be a part of making that happen.
Well, I would love to watch you and Connie make that happen. Thanks for being on the show, and thanks for what you're doing to advance these conversations, especially in the times we're going through now. So it's nice to see top agents focusing time on that. So I appreciate it, and I'm sure all of our listeners and viewers do, and hopefully they can share it with other people that need to hear the message. And before we sign off, what are the best ways for people to get in touch with both of you if they want to reach out about real estate or coaching or just connect with you? How should they do that?
Yeah, they can go to our website, connieandkenny.com, or send us an email at hello, HELLO, at Connie, CONNIEANDKENNY.com. We're on Instagram at Connie and Kenny, and we also host our weekly podcast, The Thoughtful Realtor.
On all of your favorite podcast distribution channels, platforms, I don't know what they're called, but
all right. And you're on TikTok as well, correct?
We're not.
Kenny,
I'm
I'm
not
not.
aware of TikTok.
Not yet.
But soon. All right. Well, connect with Connie and Kenny on their website or Instagram. Thanks again for being on the show, and thank you everyone who tuned in to
Thanks,
listen
Dan.
or watch.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Dan.
having us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the HyperFast Show. Subscribe to us if you want to make sure you get the latest and greatest HyperFast shows. And remember, we love reviews. Reviews help us bring better and better guests and improve our shows. So give us the good, the bad, and the ugly. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time.